everybody, it's James Lindsay. You're listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point-like summary of a single topic from woke Marxism that we need to understand so that we can beat it. And what we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to tell you very simply why woke doesn't work. I'm not going to go into this huge, complicated, theoretical discussion. I'm just going to tell you that the godfather of woke, Herbert Marcuse, explained that what has become woke in his wake was never meant to work. In fact, it's meant not to work. That's the whole point. So I'm going to read a very short piece out of, literally just a few sentences out of his 1969 essay on liberation. But let me give you some context first. Obviously, we can talk about how woke doesn't work anywhere you look. You know, the saying is, of course, go woke, go broke. And we know that that's not really true because woke is propped up by these kind of very corrupt cartel logics of like ESG. Remember that woke, we could say, is DEI, and DEI is the S in ESG. And we know that the entire ESG program is propping this up in the corporate environment. And so all of our big corporations, because they have gigantic investment firms pulling the strings to make them be ESG, thus DEI, thus woke compliant, are keeping this alive. But we know that woke tears apart businesses, it tears apart institutions, it tears apart young people, it just deranges their minds, it turns them into people who seem, look at these kids, they're not kids, they're young adults. Look at these young adults at our apparently best universities in the world. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, USC, Columbia, in particular Columbia. We could go on. The list could go on. We know it's basically all of them. University of Chicago got involved. We know that this is a thing, and they've built these encampments. Let's be real for a second. Look at the damn things. So these are our best and brightest, allegedly our most competent, and this is what they're able to do. It looks like shit. It looks like incompetent morons have built up, I don't even know what to call it. They're on the quad. They're using tents from Walmart. Somebody else bought them. Looks like crap. Doesn't even look organized. Looks, even though it is very organized, it looks like a sloppy mess. And this is allegedly the best and brightest of our young people. We had people their age with less education writing stuff like the Constitution a couple hundred years ago. And this is what these morons are able to put together. But that's what I'm talking about. The point is that they're not meant to be competent. Them being competent would be a problem for the woke ideology, because the woke ideology, as a new generation of Marxism, of a kind of a highly evolved form of Western Marxism, is meant to be incompetent. So that's some context. We can see that it doesn't work. We know that it doesn't work. It doesn't heal families. It doesn't heal institutions. It just makes everything worse. And it's not even like these kids can, I'm not positive they can tie their shoes. This is just unbelievable how sloppy they are. But that's part of the point, and that's what I wanted to communicate in this. What they are actually protesting against. Now, a little further context. This is in Herbert Marcuse's essay on liberation. What does liberation mean? Liberation means liberation or emancipation from the structure of society itself. Liberation derives partly from Mao. Notice that Mao Zedong named his communist army the People's Liberation Army. The word liberation's not there by mistake. The thing we call the Viet Cong from the communist North Vietnamese was a liberation army. All of the crazy communist movements in South America were liberation fronts. The sloppy crap that's happening in the name of something called Palestine is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. We're seeing this word again and again. Well, we're actually, and that's all decolonize this, decolonize that, just like South America. We see that education for liberation was Paulo Freire's idea in South America. And so what it is actually third worldism is an old term for this. It is a form of radical Marxist activism that's dedicated to liberating the third world from the impositions of the encroaching first world. That's what it was about. You're not supposed to colonize. You're not supposed to bring in, business opportunities. You're not supposed to help them grow. You're supposed to liberate them from the first world. In other words, you're supposed to liberate them from the fruits of the Enlightenment as it took place in the West. That's the whole idea. It's also liberation from reality. It's liberation from limiting principles is actually the best way to phrase it. Limiting principles are things that tell leftists no. It's very clear if you read leftist literature that they believe that the seat of reality is imagination. So if they can imagine it, like everybody just taking care of everybody else and nobody having to actually work, if you can just imagine it, then it can be. They actually believe this. That's part of the constructivist worldview at their heart. If you imagine a different world, you can construct the different world. And because the world is constructed by whoever controls power, then they construct their imagination. Well, limiting principles, including reality itself, the laws of physics, impose upon those idiotic imaginative visions, mostly of people with, let's just be clear, either naive idealism or cluster B personality disorders, pushing for a world that caters to them. And that's what's really behind this. That's a different podcast on a different day. But that's what they're looking for liberation from, is limiting principles that tell them that the fantasies of their imagination are not going to work and therefore cannot be something we force people to do. Take, for example, queer liberation or transgender liberation. You hear it as transgender rights or trans rights or human rights. What they're looking for is liberation from any expectation. This is straight from queer theory. Liberation from any expectation that they are going to adhere to the norms and standards of legitimacy of society. That's what they're looking for. And if society says, and it's not even society, of course, but that's how they think because they're constructivists. If society says that men should be male and women should be female, well, then that's an imposition upon them that they need to be liberated from. They believe their Marxist theories like queer theory and neo-Marxism or critical theory or critical pedagogy give them what they call emancipatory authority to say no to reality, to say no to every possible limiting principle. That's what repressive tolerance, another essay by Herbert Marcuse that we've talked about in the past, is all about. He makes the point that there is a kind of tolerance that pretends to be tolerant that's repressive of people. And what are you supposed to do about it? You're supposed to embrace something completely the opposite that he calls liberating tolerance. And liberating tolerance is the idea that, in his words, that movements from the left must be extended tolerance and tolerance must be withdrawn from movements from the right. But what that means is anything that leftists want have to be agreed to, and any limiting principles that tell them no, they have to reject and they have to be liberated from. That's what the essay on liberation is about. And in fact, if you don't recall, you should read the essay again or listen to my podcast where I read the essay in 4 parts. The first chapter of this, when they're talking about liberation, is creating, in Herbert Marcuse's own words, a biological foundation for socialism. Do you understand that? That is to remake what it means to be human. But the idea isn't actually that they're remaking humanity. That's not how Marxists think. Marxists believe they actually know what true human nature is, and that the impositions of society, which is repressive, prevent people from being who they really are, which is Marxists, or queer, or socialists, or anti-racists. You pick the theory, it doesn't matter. That's the idea. So that's what they are actually looking for, is liberation from reality and the impositions of reality and human nature so that they can live out their Marxist imaginations and force everybody to go along with it. I brought up the queer thing specifically for the force thing, right? Because transition doesn't work by liberating yourself and living as a transsexual, which, whatever. You are to have full acceptance by society under transgender ideology instead. This isn't about trying to live your own life. It is about forcing society to agree with how you live your life. That is the fundamental tenet of the constructivist ideology. So it's a very different thing. Okay, it's also a disaster, right? It's also dysfunctional. It's expensive. has massive amounts, in this particular case, of complications is the medical term for it, which we should just call them what they are: iatrogenic harms, mutilation, destruction. All right, so let's get to Marcuse, because I want you to understand that woke was never meant to work. What are these, I keep almost wanting to call them kids, what are these college students and their, I think it's more than half of them, handlers and faculty handlers, and I separate those two, by the way. There are handlers that are absolutely not even associated with the university at all. They keep getting arrested at these things. What are they protesting? And of course, we can get into the weeds about whether or not it counts as a protest. I prefer the word uprising. But what are they protesting? Let's read one paragraph from the Essay on Liberation by Herbert Marcuse. He says, "But while the image of the libertarian potential of advanced industrial society is repressed and hated," okay, so let's stop, because he says libertarian. Libertarian he is not using correctly. He's not talking about people like Gary Johnson. He's not talking about the Libertarian Party. He's not talking about people who are super skeptical of the government. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about liberation, okay? So the freedom to be liberated from limiting principles whatsoever, not only those imposed by the state, but those imposed by social norms, expectations of legitimacy, and, in fact, reality itself. Let's start again. "But while the image of the libertarian potential of advanced industrial society is repressed and hated by the managers of repression and their consumers, it motivates the radical opposition and gives it its strange, unorthodox character." So, one sentence at a time from the text, let's be very clear. He says that there's this liberatory potential, I'm going to say it correctly, in other words, liberation potential in advanced industrial society because we're very wealthy. We have high production. We have high standards of living. Therefore, we don't have to work to make ourselves survive. But the managers of society, whether they're business managers, whether they are bureaucrats in the government or the socially powerful, repress and hate that possibility. And so do the consumers who want to keep the ball rolling. That's what he's saying. While that's happening, while they don't like that there's a possibility for a communist utopia in an advanced industrial society, that's what he's saying, that possibility simultaneously, that utopian vision, which is what this essay is all about, he calls it utopian repeatedly, motivates the radical opposition and gives it a strange, unorthodox character. That unorthodox character is what I'm talking about. Now, in another place in this essay, he actually calls it the strange clownish forms that so irritate the establishment. So he literally does say that the point of what we now call woke is clown world, but that's a separate point to this paragraph. He goes on to say that what's happening in this woke Marxism, as we now identify it, which is downstream from his critical Marxism, is very different from the revolution, that's the communist revolution, at previous stages of history. Here's how he says it. Very different from the revolution at previous stages of history, this opposition, meaning the woke one, is directed against the totality of what? Oppression? No. Limiting principles? No. Not like other communist revolutions in the past, very different from the revolution at previous stages of history. Notice it's one revolution that's ongoing until it succeeds. This opposition is directed against the totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society. Do you understand what woke is now? It is an opposition directed against the totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society. So I remind you of the definition of queer given by David Halperin in Saint Foucault. If you recall, the way he words it is that it is queer is whatever, that's in italics, is opposed to the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. Here's Marcuse. This opposition is directed against the totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society. Do you understand? Their goal is not a well-functioning, prosperous society. That's what they are revolting against. He says even more to the point, a protest against its form with a capital F, what is a capital F form. That is a Platonic ideal of what a well-functioning, prosperous society should look like. So that means they're not just protesting against an advanced industrial society that's well-functioning and prosperous. They're not just against a stable functioning society and prosperity. They're against the ideal form of such a thing. They are against the very concept of such a thing. They are against what Hegel would have called its essential concept, Begriff. They are against that. That's what they are protesting. The idea itself of a well-functioning, prosperous society and all of its forms possible. The totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society, a protest against its form. He says that what is that form? The commodity form of men and things. It's a protest against the imposition of false values and a false morality. Remember, the view from Marxism is that they know the true story of human nature. We are actually socialists. We have forgotten that because we've had an imposition of false values rooted in private property rights and capital, if we go to Marx, and a false morality, which is the ideology of capitalism, that is actually alienating us, estranging us from our true nature. Marx wrote in the Economic Philosophic Manuscripts in 1844 that true communism isn't hating capitalism or wanting to abolish private property, as he put in the second chapter of the Communist Manifesto. True communism is, in his own words, the positive transcendence of private property as human self-estrangement. So the idea that you can be an individual, that's really the key, who owns things, is an imposition of false values and false morality that is human self-estrangement. In other words, it's humans estranging themselves from what it means to be human. And Marcuse's answer to this problem that Marx claims to have identified is an opposition directed against the totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society. So through the iron law of woke projection and knowing that liberationism comes from third worldism, we can see that the goal is to impose the shitholeness of the third world into the well-functioning, prosperous societies of the first world. And isn't that exactly what's happening? He goes on to say this new consciousness and the instinctual rebellion isolate such opposition from the masses and from the majority of organized labor, the integrated majority, and make for the concentration of radical politics in active minorities. Here's the birth of identity Marxism, or woke, as I call it, mainly among the young middle class intelligentsia. So there's your little bastards outside the colleges or in the colleges, and among the ghetto populations. Here, prior to all political strategy and organization, liberation becomes a vital biological need. I wasn't kidding. That's what he really says. So that is what woke is really about. It is about opposition against the totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society, a protest even against its Platonic form in ideal space. So don't let it get into anybody's head that woke can work. Woke is designed not to work. It is designed to be the opposite of working on purpose, deliberately, as vigorously as possible, so that society disintegrates, is not prosperous, is very much like the third world. Why? Because the liberationists know how to get a communist revolution out of a shithole third world country, and they cannot get one in a prosperous, well-functioning first world country. And it's as simple as that. So woke is the third worldification of the West so that it can generate the conditions for a cultural and proletarian revolution. That's it. That's all. That's what it's about. It will never work, not because it can't work, not just because it doesn't know how to work, not just because they're good at conquest and bad at management. It can't work because it's designed not to work. It's designed to break and destroy. So we must stop it, and we have all the moral authority we need to stop it.